Hello and welcome to Material Matters with Grant Gibson. The show has been running for 6 years now, would you believe? However, for listeners who might be new to all this, the idea is that I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about a material or technique with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by author, educator, curator and consultant Seetal Solanki. Seetal describes herself as a materials translator and has been in the vanguard of material thinking since she launched her practice Matter in 2015. 3 years later, she produced a hugely influential book, Why Materials Matter, and she's gone on to work with a variety of brands, including Nike, Selfridges and Potato Head in Bali, as well as teaching at institutions such as Central St Martin's, where, incidentally, she graduated from the Textiles MA, and the Royal College of Art. Her latest project sees her joining forces with designer Jorge Penades in Madrid for Uprooted, an exhibition that explores Spain's olive oil industry. Seetal, thank you very, very much for doing this. How the devil are you?
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure.
I'm doing great, actually. I'm still buzzing from the opening of the Uprooted project that you've just spoken about.
We have a bit of a tradition on this podcast of asking guests about how and where they work. And now I'm looking on the screen at you currently, and there's a lot of books. Are you in your studio? Where are you currently?
I'm at home. Okay.
So shall we cheat? Unless you work from home. What does your studio look like? How do you work?
Looks like this.
Okay, a lot of books.
My home is my studio currently.
Okay.
And I work very dynamically, so I don't necessarily get the best out of myself in one space. So I'm always moving.
You're moving.
Yeah.
Where do you move to? Are you working in and out of coffee shops, or how does this dynamism manifest itself?
Well, I'm here like 2 days a week. And then I would move maybe to a friend's house, maybe share space there. I don't really like to do co-working spaces, but then as and when I need to move, I kind of do.
I think it'd be really interesting in the first place to ask about your practice or consultancy. On your website, you describe Matter as, and I'm going to quote, a relationship practice focused on building and bridging kinships between ourselves, materials, the immaterial, and the virtual. Can we unpick that? What does that entail?
Well, first off, it's a description that I'm changing very, very soon, because simply what I do is I write, I curate, I advise and educate and build with materials. I think for the longest time, it's been a real challenge to get people to build a relationship towards materials that feels less extractive and less exploitative. And that my role is to do that. And it's through those methods that I've already highlighted. And so what I end up doing is taking very complex information and complicated information around materials, which obviously extends to learning about how things are grown, how materials are grown, who works with them, where they exist and originate from, how they get processed, the politics around it, the economics around it, the social stigmas around it, and even the environmental challenges around it. So all of that gets translated into much more relatable forms of, I guess, expression.
As you say, you've got a multi-stranded practice, nomadic way of working. One of those strands is curation. You've just opened, as we speak this very day, a show with Jorge in Madrid entitled Uprooted. It's celebrating the 10th anniversary of his practice, I believe, and it explores Spain's olive oil industry. Why the olive oil industry?
Yeah, it's very close to his heart. He was born in Andalusia, and that's where all the olive groves are in Spain. And he's had a very close relationship towards olive trees, the groves, the agriculture, mainly the roots, actually, the roots of the olive tree. So he's been working with olive roots for the last 10 years at least. And well, since he's had his practice, which for me is a really determined perspective towards a material and like persistent, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it's come to a time in his career or like his own practice to recognize his own roots and be rerouted. And these olive roots are allowing him to kind of like channel his energy towards that 10 years of his practice. He's almost rerouting, but being uprooted at the same time with his own practice. So the olive oil industry, Spain is the largest producer of olive oil across the world, which I had no idea about until being part of this project. And we've been friends for a really long time and have been in conversation for probably the last 2 years where I've questioned his approach to materials. This one particular project that he did with Camper, he did an interior installation for them with olive roots. And he filled out all the holes with resin and all the imperfections that existed in the olive roots. Didn't really give you the impression that it was coming from that source. It just looked like ordinary timber somewhat. I was like, what are you doing? I was like, why are you forcing this material to do something it's perhaps not, naturally fit for? So I was like, this material has its own characteristics, its own personality. Like, surely you should be asking the material what it can and can't do and what it's capable of, because it was all bolted together and it just looked really rigid. And if you see now the approach that he's taken, he's really paid attention to what the material qualities are and the oiliness of it, the smoothness of it, the warmth of it, the almost like the holes that exist naturally because of the stones, like being placed there because it's growing underground, and it's so unpredictable. Playing where that unpredictability is what has been the biggest challenge for him, because as a designer, a lot of the time we're trying to impose our own impression of what we want out of it, right? What we want the material to do. We kind of take control, and we reverse that this time with him, because my methodology is let the material lead.
Okay, interesting. So if I'm going to visit Madrid and I walk in, what would I see?
Lots of olive roots, which look like tree trunks, but it's mainly used for firewood. You'll see pieces of furniture that were made for the camper store, which Jorge did. So it kind of takes you on a journey from the origin of this olive tree, how they've been uprooted and why they're being uprooted.
Can I ask why? Why are they being uprooted?
These trees are still alive and they fruit, but not as often.
Okay.
And therefore, the productivity of those fruits, the olives, aren't at the rate at which the industry wants them at.
So they become uneconomic, in other words.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the roots, therefore, and the tree itself would normally be destroyed, or what would happen?
Firewood.
Right.
Mainly.
Yes, of course.
Spanish people, they cook with the firewood, they heat their homes with the firewood and all sorts of things. But there's such an abundance of it that it becomes a byproduct of the industry. So
there's roots, there's furniture. What else would we see?
You'll see a material interview.
Yes. Good. I'm glad you said that, because coincidentally, I suspect, literally an hour before we were due to talk, this press release dropped into my inbox about the show, and it talked about the concept of a material interview.
It's something that I do often. with materials. So whenever we're designing something, we want to understand how it functions and feels. And why not try to understand how materials function and feel before we even start to work with it? And many, many design processes have always kind of like pushed the material towards the end of the design process, which means the material gets shoehorned into the product or object or space. And it's not very meaningful or effective or practical a lot of the time. So this methodology begins with the material. It starts to understand how this material functions and feels. It then understands its life cycle. It then understands the systems in which it can be applied into. So this material interview is very much geared towards this specific, I guess, the root. So is it growing above ground? Is it growing below ground? Because the roots also like emerge above ground. And so is it green? Is it dry? You were kind of going through this questionnaire with it. So we understand its properties, its qualities, what it's useful for. And then it goes through lots of different processes of tools, handcrafted tools, industrial tools, and it kind of it's like a filtering system of working with the material and what it's capable of, and we've had a series of experiments to showcase what those outcomes can be. So it's a diagrammatic showcase and then physical examples of it as well.
Okay, very good. That makes sense. There's also a photo essay, I think I'm right in saying, as part of the show?
Yeah, a photo essay by Max Creasy. So the three of us went out to Andalusia last September and we did a field trip and we discovered many different aspects of the olive oil industry, visited an olive oil production facility and grove and interviewed people there. And then, yeah, it was all based on that trip that we did together. So Max did a photo essay of what we discovered.
What's your role in a situation like this, Seetal, with Jorge? How does it work? What are you bringing to it? I mean, obviously the interview sounds like it's very much coming from your practice. He brought you on board as another brain, or what was he looking for? How do you dovetail the different roles in a project like this?
Yeah, I did all the research, and the curator tends to create a framing for a project like this. So it's understanding how to frame it, how to even write about these things, because all the abstract and the writing for the show is something that's come from me, and I haven't taken a traditional curatorial approach to it where there's very complicated language. It's very simple language, and it helps you understand the industry and the project through a statement and a question. So very much about having the audience involved in the exhibition. So not only are they being asked questions, so they need to think about their kind of approach or response to it, but it's also allowing them to be curious and ask questions in return. So it's a dialogue. The whole exhibition, I would say, is very much an open dialogue right now. And it's the first iteration of hopefully a few. And I think right now we don't necessarily have the answers, but what we do have are questions and the ability to collaborate with people from the industry, designers themselves, and getting them to be more material-led. And the results are very evident as to what that transition actually looks like. So it's possible.
Very good. I was flicking through your book, Why Materials Matter, which, as I said, was published 2018 before this interview. And Jorge, I noticed, was the very first entry with pieces made from leather offcuts. So I guess, what is it about his work that you enjoy?
I think his natural curiosity to want to understand how things are made. And what I've seen his focus to be in is how things are joined, how materials are joined together. And I think joinery is such a brilliant way to bring materials from other sectors or industries together to make other things from. So he's kind of a person who is a bit of a, not hustler. Yeah, he is a hustler.
I quite like that.
He is a hustler.
He's a hustler. I quite like that. He's a materials hustler.
Yeah, and he doesn't care in the sense of whether he's worked with the material or not. He's curious enough to discover what can be made from it. And if there's a problem that's attached to it, he understands how to be the mechanism to not necessarily fix it, but understand how to connect the dots.
Interesting. I'm going to throw the attention back on you now, because you founded Matter in 2015. You've been working in the design industry for over a decade before that. So what compelled you to create this space for yourself? Because there aren't many people doing what you do, I guess. Maybe Franklin Till, but there aren't many others.
I was tired of how disrespected materials were, and also the role that I have. I trained as a textile designer for a very long time and worked in industry for, like you say, over a decade before even creating Matter. And in each industry I worked within, materials were never considered as something of importance or value. And so much waste was created and so much money was being spent, and it could be avoided. And so much was being exploited and extracted at the same time. And I think we don't need to go on this journey every single time and start from scratch. There's so much knowledge here already. And if we allow the material to lead, then we will get further. And actually, materials are incredibly versatile. Maybe they could be placed into lots of different departments or applications or outputs and create infinite possibilities. So actually, we're being a lot more, I don't like this word, but it's the only word I can think of, efficient. So it's just many missed opportunities, and it was very frustrating. So I just hated the fact that materials were being highly disrespected. And I think there's a really great quote from George Monbiot, who is a brilliant journalist and author within like environmental stuff. He says we are not materialistic enough. And I agree. We need to understand where things come from and how things are made.
Yes. And I guess that leads on to a question which I don't think I've ever asked in 127 episodes of this podcast before. But why do materials matter in your view?
Everything is made from something. So if we understand how things are made, we understand how it's very grandiose maybe, but how the world operates actually. And at different scales and from different cultures and from different countries. And they actually allow us to bridge borders. We are connected through materials. I mean, I can even talk about my own, I guess, ancestral migration, because my family have lived in lots of different countries and born in different countries. And being my parents in Kenya, my grandfather in Uganda, my other grandparents in India, and then I have Persian in me, and I was raised in the UK, but I've lived in other countries. And if we kind of trace it back, it's part of the Silk Road. And that was a very clear indicator of trade, material trade. And along the way, my family have picked up skills along with to kind of attach it to the materials that they're trading with, and picked up those skills to then be able to migrate with. So these materials have allowed people to migrate across different lands to create a better life for themselves, so to speak. And I'm on this journey to understand how I'm made as well.
Well, that's quite intriguing because I was going to ask you about your background. So I'm glad we've got into that space because you grew up in Leicester. I think your parents ran a corner shop. When did you become interested in design?
Oh, from very, very early on. I would say the earliest memory I have is cooking. I was deeply fascinated how something can be made from nothing, literally, then be remade into something else from leftovers. So I was I was principled in a way that everything was valuable. So nothing ever was wasted, even down to the residue of the tinned tomatoes, rinsing that out and putting that into the dish. Yeah, I was fascinated with how these different processes could encourage an entirely different textural quality, different taste. It was really appreciated as well.
I've seen you give a recipe for cheese soufflé online with the design edit. What was it about the cheese soufflé particularly that made you choose it, I wonder?
It's alchemy. It's such alchemy. And people call me an alchemist and many other things, but cooking and materials are very much similar. The reason I chose cheese soufflé is because it's magic. All these ingredients making something that is so light and fluffy from absolutely basic ingredients. I'm like, the alchemy involved in order for that to happen is actually magic.
I think you described it as going from a powder into a liquid and then into a solid.
Yeah.
Which I rather enjoy.
Exactly. And I think that's very much the way in which materials can be transformed and also translated. Is even the periodic table says everything, actually. And that's how the whole world is made. Yeah, I think cooking and materials are very much a similar vocabulary, but they have very different outputs. You know, we always start from a domestic space when making materials in our kitchen. You know, a lot of these biodegradable or bioplastic alternatives are being made in the kitchen with all these different starches and, you know, domestic ingredients, glycerin, what else is there? Anyway, water and so on. And you make that into a paste on your stove and you then mold it into some cake mold, a silicone mold. It's the same. And then it just scales up into a space where it's actually the domestic tools are industrialized. And that's the only difference. Even weaving at home gets industrialized. It's needlework. It's all the same. It's really, really, really similar, like eggs. I use that example a lot, and I think it's the most relatable ingredient because I would imagine pretty much every culture works with eggs in some way.
I hope you're enjoying the show. It's shaping up to be a busy year for Material Matters. There'll be loads of episodes of the podcast, of course, while the London Fair returns for its 4th edition in September. And this summer, we're launching a new event in partnership with 3 Days of Design. Material Matters Copenhagen runs from the 18th to the 20th of June at the extraordinary Ukraine House in the city's Christian Haven district. It will showcase brands that have a distinct material story to tell, illustrating the importance of material intelligence and how it will play a role in shaping our lives over the coming decades. Material Matters Copenhagen will be spread across 2 floors, and there are a variety of spaces to suit a range of budgets. It will be a key event during 3 Days of Design, so if you'd like to be involved, email us at hello@materialmatters.design. That's hello@materialmatters.design. Were you academic at school? Was school something you thrived in?
No, I was really into sports, dance. What else was I doing? Anything artistic, anything physical, anything that I could express myself through my body. I was smart. That was never the issue. But I just preferred to express myself through my body. And my mind, it wasn't being, those muscles weren't being challenged in the same way.
Leicester is quite an interesting city. There are a lot of different cultures. Presumably there are a lot of different influences to draw on, and there are a lot of textiles coming out of Leicester. And I'm wondering what influence the city itself had on you and your thinking.
Yeah. Me and Leicester have a very difficult relationship. But
why is that?
I don't think I'll go into it too much, but I felt rejected from the city and the people. I was an outsider always, and still am. And I think I was the impression was that I was going to be working in a factory, which I actually didn't mind. I was so interested in how things are made. So we were living opposite a factory, and I would always be in there trying to understand what this world looks like and feels like and what happens in it and all the different machineries involved. I even made my own clothes for a long time. My mum she studied fashion as a diploma years and years ago now. And I was intrigued as to, my dad he's a good fixer and DIY things. So I learned a lot of practical things around the house of plumbing and electrician stuff and how to fix things around the house. I was very hands-on always. So culturally, it influenced me heavily because of the philosophies based around Hinduism, which is what I was brought up on. So all the things married together or like in this big melting pot really set a strong basis for what I do now. And, the philosophies that I was brought up on was karma, obviously, and animism. Everything is alive and we need to respect that. And there's a sense of worship around it before even working with certain, I guess, ingredients or living things.
I mean, that opens up a number of things that I'm quite keen to talk about. Why did you feel like an outsider in Leicester?
Now it's going into therapy talk. I just thought I think differently about. I was always asking questions, but nobody had the answers to my questions, and therefore I was othered, and it felt like I wasn't the kind of person who would just go along, obedient. I was seen as a rebel, all these things. And I would still obey the rules, but I was curious about why we do certain things and what does this mean? And what impact does it have? All these simple questions, but it was really difficult to get anything that would be resolved. I didn't have any answers. So I had to do my own discovery. And that led to so many areas of inquiry, which opened up my own brain. And I almost did my own schooling outside of school. So yeah, I was curious.
Interesting. Because you went to Loughborough initially to study jewellery before turning to textiles. So why jewellery in the first instance?
Because I wanted to learn skills. And skills that you could essentially make a three-dimensional object from a flat sheet of metal. And also, again, it's going back to the analogy of solid, liquid, gas. I was working with all those methods within jewelry, and it was an incredible skill to have because I could understand, geology. I could also understand mining, minerals, and then understanding where they come from, how they get transformed into these exquisite objects and adornments. And I think that allowed me to put it into textiles in a way which was a bit more unique to my own experience. So a lot of what I was doing in textiles then became quite three-dimensional. I didn't really know that at the time, obviously. Yeah, on reflection, it was a really useful pathway for me.
And why did you decide to switch to textiles? Was there a moment where you kind of went, jewelry, this isn't working for me, but I can see that textiles might?
Yeah, because I felt like with jewelry, it felt a bit limiting to the scale at which I can expand myself within. Whereas textiles, multimedia textiles in particular, I could do architectural scale, which is something that I did explore. And I could also do body scale and all the in-between and smaller scale even. So I think I wanted to express myself in many ways, not just the body scale.
Fair enough. I'm quite interested. You said you felt like an outsider in Leicester. Were you feeling like you fitted when you went to university?
No. I think it happened when I came to London.
Right. So coming to Central St. Martin's.
Yeah, I could be myself.
Yeah.
It wasn't just Central St. Martin's. It was being here in London itself. London has felt my first home.
Yeah. I mean, we've had a number of people from the Textiles Futures, what became Material Futures course on the show. I mean, as you're alluding to, London was important to you, but I'm wondering if that course was important to your thinking as well.
100%. It was incredibly novel at the time because I think it was only 2 years in that the program was running, and I was part of that cohort, and it expanded my knowledge to worlds I didn't even think were actualized yet. I thought they were, in theory, they were possible because I was always interested. What is a textile? It was always my burning question. What is a textile and what can we do with them? Because for me, I always saw textiles in everything. And I was on this journey to discover more and more and more. And this course in particular really allowed me to explore it. So, I did architectural scale stuff. I did fashion. I did automotive and lighting and animation. And I wanted to understand digital, physical, scale, industries. And I did. It broke me, that course, but yeah.
Did it? In what way did it break you?
Because you're shed of everything you know to then rebuild it back up again and actually then place yourself in a position where you're like, oh, but this is actually what I'm questioning. So rather than all this the preconceived idea of what a textile is either fashion or interiors, right? Generally. And the main question is, I get asked, can you make me a dress? I'm like, yes, but, and it's really frustrating because I'm like, well, yeah, I can do that, but I can also make a material that can power your home. There's also that. And this course, really championed those worlds that could be imagined and reimagined. And for me, the imagination is everything, because if you get taught that, you can apply that imagination in real world applications. So that is where I began to really tread on that journey.
And did you have a sense of where your career might go at this stage?
Nope.
Fair enough.
I've tried everything you can possibly imagine. So I worked for Nissan. I did car interiors and exteriors. And I worked for UVA, United Visual Artists. I did architectural scale lighting installations and animations. I did fashion. I worked for McQueen. menswear and McHugh and Hussein Shalayan, and I did so many different types of work to understand how textiles are manifested in these spaces. And wow, I got to basically live out my MA in real life.
I mean, this is a question that you've kind of touched upon. It's come up from time to time when I've talked to textile designers and artists. I spent some time discussing it with the excellent Freddie Robbins, for example. Do you think there's a material hierarchy? And if so, where does textiles come?
We're at the bottom.
Because you have talked about material discrimination in the past. I wonder if we can unpick that a little bit.
Yeah. I think I've written an article actually called Materials Are for Boys and Textiles Are for Girls. And it definitely goes into that narrative of hierarchy and values around the material value and the textile value, essentially. Because even changing the term, well, the word from textiles to materials, even on the course, like it's now called Material Futures.
Which was quite controversial at the time, as I recall.
Yeah, but necessary. And because it's really expansive, you're not just looking at fibers and fabrics, it's also looking at solid surfaces, solid materials, the science behind it. It's so layered and interconnected, and there's no real one way to explore it. But the hierarchy of textiles is we're kind of at the bottom of the pile. And I will probably give this as an example. When you go and visit a materials library, everything's kind of sectioned: wood, metal, plastic, glass. Textiles are in one box, but each of those textiles are made from so many different things. If it's a cellulose, that's from a tree. If it's silk, that's obviously from maybe spider silk or mulberry silk. There's so many different variations of fibers within these textiles that why is it only in one box? So they're completely misunderstood. And it's also seen as something that's domestic, right? So it's woman's work. But actually, if you see a lot of mills and weaving in industrial weaving places, it's men. So men are actually operating in the textile industry more heavily than women are. And the discrepancy behind that, I think, is really challenging because textiles aren't just a domestic material. We wear it, it's in our homes. It actually provides membranes for our cars, even like carbon fiber is a textile, for example. And that is placed into many different products to provide lightness, which is therefore more effective in terms of cost and speed.
How do you change that hierarchy? Is that something that interests you?
Yeah, it's definitely part of my role, but I don't do it in a way where I'm shouting about it. It's kind of inherent, and much as sustainability is, it's not an option. It has to happen. So yeah, there's not really one way.
No, sure. I mean, your practice is a decade old now, and we're talking about material hierarchies, but do you think the design industry has a greater understanding of materials now than it did when you started?
Definitely. I would say it has definitely increased, but I also feel like there's been a period where it's become so popular that we've almost misunderstood the assignment of what materials are, because there's all these new materials that are being made, right? And I'm not sure for what purpose yet. But, all the bioplastics that look like jelly, which aren't really that functional, which are probably more damaging than actual plastic, just aren't that useful. And actually, sometimes they cause more damage because they still have oil. Some of them still have oil within there. And then we need a whole new composting system or combustion system to do that for us. And it gets very complicated, but we kind of lose the sense of why these materials should even exist in the world and what are they serving? Who are they serving? Because I think there's a statistic where there's 165,000 unique materials being manufactured in the world. Now, for me, I'm just like, but what are we doing with them? And why can we not also look at what we have, what we already have available, and that is in abundance? Because we talk about material scarcity so much, that narrative is constantly being raised in conversations and panels and so on. But actually, what we need to look at is what we have already and work with that sometimes and look at it at a different scale, because not all materials are meant for global scale, right? So why can't we look at it from an individual scale, a smaller community, a local, regional, country scale, city scale? There's so many ways of approaching materials, and that is the hierarchy we need to also refer to, because we're not there yet. Got a long time to go, but yeah, we're not there yet.
You told the journalist and podcaster Katie Tregarden that and I'm going to quote, your whole practice is built on frustration. So what does that mean?
It's what I was speaking of earlier. The disrespect that has occurred within the material world from the exploiting, the extracting, the lack of understanding. It's a frustrating task that I have, but it's a task that I'm willing to go on because I'm a hopeful person.
I'm glad to hear it. It'd be terrible if your whole life was just going to be frustration.
No, I'm in the hopeful space because the frustration was a catalyst, but it wasn't the thing that's kept me there. So the hopefulness is what is keeping me going. That's the fuel that I live on.
We talked about this earlier and then we digressed our conversation, but it's something that crops up quite regularly when you talk about materials, this notion of spirituality, materials being alive and having personalities. I mean, it seems to me you're saying there's a different way of understanding materials that's beyond at least Western science. And you've talked about this desire to humanize materials. Can we talk a little bit about that and what your thinking behind that is?
Yeah. I grew up with the notion that everything is living. And so we need to pay respect to the living world, whether it's water or whether it's stone or whether it's grass or sand. There's life within it. It exists. And so what we take and what we give back has to be mutual. And these are principles that I live by. So that kind of exchange is really important to have. And it's a conversation with the material. So that conversation encourages me to understand, okay, so what is it you actually need? And what is it I need? And therefore, the exchange the conversation can be formulated in an exchange. And that is done through a non-verbal dialogue. So how does this material like smell? How hollow is it? So the density of it. So you understand the sound qualities. You then understand how does it taste? Is it actually edible? And the aesthetic qualities, obviously. And what's the other one? Anyway, all the five senses, but there's obviously more. We start there. It's very human and very easy to kind of go through these processes, but you have to pay attention. And that attention is forming a sense of consciousness within yourself to then understand, oh, actually, this exists in lots of other things too. So, it requires energy. This transference of energy means that we are learning about one another. And with that knowledge, we can then pay respect to who it is right now, and then what it could potentially become. So, and that's through the tools, obviously. And hopefully that's a respectful journey. It's had a respectful life, hopefully. We can then design a respectful death for it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm keen to discover how some of this thinking has been applied, Seetal. I said at the top of the show, over the years, you've worked with the likes of Nike and Selfridges. One of your most intriguing projects is for the Potato Head Hotel in Bali, which is a luxury resort. I think OMA have done some of the buildings there. It's named after Dutch colonialists, if people are wondering at home. What did they bring you in to do?
Basically, the brief was to design and build a hotel in Bali with materials from Indonesia, skills from Indonesia, manufacturing from Indonesia, and crafts from Indonesia. So we get a sense of place because, majority of the hotels, I would say, could be anywhere in the world. They look very generic in their spatial quality, and not much thought has gone into what it's made from. A lot of it's imported, right? So having that as the brief, I was invited out to Bali, and I've been there a few times and with them before. So we've already got an established relationship, and map the island of its materials, its crafts, its manufacturing. And it was incredible. Visited loads of different sites, kept stopping along the way on, it's very ad hoc as well as it being planned. Visited natural dyers, cotton farmers, lava stone, stonemasons with lava stone. I even went to this salt production facility, which was very lo-fi and beautiful, ceramic studio, many things, bamboo, artistry. And we were there with Max Lam, actually. So he was there on the same trip as us. And Faye Too Good was involved, and Dirk van der Kooi and a few others. Wrote the briefs for them and paired them with different craftspeople and artisans and manufacturers to be able to create furniture, interiors, accessories for the hotel rooms and spaces, like public spaces and restaurants and all sorts, from the materials of the island.
Right. Which is a fascinating brief, and presumably the client must have hired you not exactly knowing what results they would achieve.
Yeah, it was a gamble, but worth taking, because what it's become now is a really beautiful space, because I think the beauty is what is getting people to be curious about the space. And I would even refer to the brief that and the strategic direction for the hotel that we created was the giving economy. So in Bali, it's a very, very high vibrational place spiritually. And we always saw they have these offerings in palm leaves, and there are 4 compartments. And in each compartment, there's a different offering, whether it's flowers or something else. And there's one that's placed on a higher level, which is for the gods, and then on the ground, which is for the demons. And humans just happen to be like walking in between that. So the respect that they pay towards good and evil, and what is deemed to be good and evil, and even from what they wear, there's like this checkered, men especially, they wear this checkered cloth wrapped around their waist. And again, it's symbolizing that. So there's a lot of symbolic meaning within the culture, which is always trying to strive balance. And we brought that into the briefing and the narrative of the briefing as well. And giving and receiving was a really big part of it. So whatever we were taking from the island, we were giving back in some way.
And these makers that you discovered, were they making for the local population in the main, or was there a lot who were involved in what is a fairly massive tourist industry out there?
Yeah. So a lot of them were making for tourism.
Right.
So, these lampshades made from rattan, and they were just generic things that perhaps people don't really need. And being invited into this project meant that they could actually make something with purpose. And therefore their business meant that they could survive on something that had more meaning, but also to produce something and be sold. So their socioeconomic status was being kept alive. And there's a retail store that's part of the hotel, which the craftspeople can like contribute to. If they get sold, they get to make more. And even skills people are being upskilled, I would say, because there's a recycling innovation lab for plastic, because obviously Bali is one of the 5 gyres in the world. So plastic gets washed up onto the ocean beds from lots of different places around the world. And so there's a collection or beach cleaning scheme that's involved. And then that gets put into the innovation lab to get recycled and made into objects. So people learn about this kind of system that is within this larger system. So yeah, there's so much that has gone into it and has provided for many people. The land itself hopefully is being regenerated in some way. For me, the most exciting material to have worked with on this project was this material called ijuk, which are palm fronds that like fall naturally from the tree. And that is traditionally used in thatching for Balinese temples. And it's so beautiful. It's very dark in color, like almost charcoal-like. And it's naturally fire retardant, we found out. And we ended up working with Max Lam on it for a lampshade. And I think it's been translated into other objects, but it's such... And that was a happen upon incident.
I mean, was that a material you were familiar with before you were in the island? Because I've never heard of it.
Nope. Because I was there, I was asking questions as usual. And what's this? So yeah, I was like, oh, what is this material? How is this? Because there was so much of it. Just on the floor, on the roads, pavements, everywhere. And I was like, there's something we can do with this. And then because there was a local Indonesian person, well, there's a few of them obviously with us. And then they were like, oh yeah, we use this and da-da-da. I was like, okay, brilliant. We need to use this. Curiosity.
Very good. Very good. Seetal, our time is up, rather sadly. So Uprooted opened today and it runs until 22nd of February. But after that, what are your future plans?
I'm writing another book.
Are you? On anything in particular?
Yes, it's called Material Atlas. Well, currently it's called that. And I'll be talking a lot about material migration. And I've categorized it native, local, migrant, and cosmic. So there'll be lots of ways in which I'll be discussing how these materials have come to be on these particular lands, and they'll be featured with lots of different projects from parts of the world that don't have much visibility. And yeah, it's kind of people, place, and process.
Very good. Sounds fascinating. When can we expect this to be published?
Maybe next year, I think. It will be with you in the world.
Okay. Well, we'll have to talk again then, by the sound of it. It sounds fascinating. That was brilliant. Seetal, thank you so much for your time. I hugely appreciated it.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
To find out more about Seetal and Matter, go to matter.org. That's ma-tt-er.org. As ever, to find other podcasts I've done and to sign up to our newsletter, go to materialmatters.design. And there are images relating to the interviews on our Instagram page, which is also materialmatters.design. And it would make me incredibly happy if you went to my Patreon page and made a pledge at patreon.com/materialmatters. For as little as £2.50 a month, you can receive an invite to various Material Matters events, as well as getting access to each episode before it's published to the wider world. Material Matters is a completely independent concern, and any help you can offer would be hugely appreciated. Ultimately, you'll be helping to take the message of the importance of materials, skill, craft, and design to a whole new audience. Thanks very much for listening.